The sun was shining, and the park buzzed with life. Kids laughing, joggers passing by, and couples enjoying the warm afternoon. Sitting on a bench, scrolling through her phone, was Lisa, a striking woman with confidence in her posture and a quiet elegance in her smile. She had just come out for some fresh air, unaware that her presence had caught someone's attention. A uniformed policeman, Officer Jake, strolled up, his usual charm on full display. With an easy grin, he struck up a conversation, throwing in a few compliments and playful remarks. He had no idea who Lisa really was, let alone who her husband was. Just as Lisa chuckled at one of his lines, a deep, authoritative voice cut through the air. "Something funny, sweetheart." The air grew thick with tension. Jake turned, only to find himself face to face with Sheriff Carter, the last man he'd ever want to cross. Officer Jake's grin faded as he turned to face the towering figure of Sheriff Carter. The older man's presence was commanding, his sharp eyes locked onto him with an intensity that sent a chill down Jake's spine. He wasn't just some random husband. He was a man who demanded respect the moment he stepped into a room. Lisa, still seated, glanced between the two men, sensing the shift in the air. She knew her husband well enough to recognize the quiet storm brewing beneath his calm expression. Jake, on the other hand, had no idea just how deep he'd stepped into trouble. "I was just having a friendly chat," Jake said, trying to keep his tone light, but his confidence wavered under Carter's steady gaze. "Friendly," Carter repeated slowly, tilting his head. His voice was measured, but there was something in it that made Jake's stomach tighten. He suddenly realized he had made a serious mistake. Jake shifted uncomfortably, his mind racing as he processed the situation. He had flirted with plenty of women in passing, harmless fun, nothing serious. But this was different. He wasn't just dealing with a protective husband. He was standing in front of a man who outranked him, a man who could make his life very difficult. Lisa glanced at Carter, reading the warning in his expression. She knew he wasn't the jealous or overreacting type, but he took respect seriously, especially when it came to his wife. She let out a small sigh, deciding to step in before things escalated. "Jake, right," she said, her voice smooth but firm. "I think you should probably head back to your patrol." Jake hesitated, glancing between them. He wanted to defend himself, insist that it was all harmless, but something told him this wasn't the time. His heart pounded as Carter took a slow step forward, his expression unreadable. Jake swallowed hard, feeling the weight of Sheriff Carter's presence pressing down on him. The park, once full of life and movement, suddenly felt too quiet, as if the world had paused to watch how this was going to play out. His training had prepared him for tough situations, but this was something entirely different. He wasn't dealing with a suspect. He was facing a man who could end his career with a single phone call. Carter's eyes never left Jake, and the silence between them stretched, thick with unspoken words. Lisa shifted slightly, sensing the tension rising with every passing second. She had seen Carter handle criminals, rookies, and even arrogant officers before, but this was personal. And when things got personal, he became even more controlled, even more dangerous. Jake forced a chuckle, trying to break the tension. "Look, Sheriff, I didn't mean any harm." Carter raised a hand, cutting him off. "Didn't mean any harm." His voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge underneath. "Then maybe you should think twice before disrespecting another officer's wife." Jake opened his mouth to respond, but the look in Carter's eyes made him stop. A small crowd had started to take notice, a few people glancing their way, sensing that something was unfolding. The weight of the moment pressed down harder. Jake knew he had to make a choice, try to defend himself or step back before it was too late. Just as Jake was about to step back, his radio crackled to life. "Officer Jake, we need you at the east side entrance immediately. Possible disturbance." The sudden call was a lifeline, a way out of this intense moment. But before he could respond, another voice came through, one that made his blood run cold. "This is Sheriff Carter. I'll handle it." Jake's eyes widened. Carter wasn't just letting him walk away. He was making sure he understood exactly who was in control. The air between them felt heavier, the tension now laced with an unspoken warning. Lisa watched closely, knowing her husband well enough to see that he wasn't done yet. Jake forced a nod. Understood, he mumbled, gripping his radio tightly. He turned to leave, but before he could take more than a step, Carter spoke again, low, firm, and just loud enough for him to hear. Next time, know who you're talking to before you get too comfortable. Jake clenched his jaw. He wanted to shake it off, to tell himself it was just a misunderstanding, but deep down, he knew he had crossed a line he shouldn't have. And now, he wasn't sure if he had just made a powerful enemy. Jake walked away, his heart pounding, but just as he reached the edge of the park, another voice called out, one that sent a fresh wave of nerves through him. "Officer Jake, hold up." He turned to see Lisa approaching, her expression unreadable. For a brief second, he thought she might scold him, warn him, or even make things worse. Instead, she gave him a small, knowing smile. "You got lucky today," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Carter doesn't play games, but he let you off easy." Jake let out a slow breath, unsure if that was supposed to make him feel better or worse. "Look, I really didn't mean anything by it," he said, his voice quieter now, more careful. Lisa nodded. "I believe you," she said, "but there's something you should know." She stepped a little closer, lowering her voice. "Carter already knew who you were before he walked up." Jake frowned. "What do you mean?" Lisa smiled again, this time with something unreadable behind it. "Let's just say, he's always watching." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He had thought this was just an unlucky encounter, a misunderstanding that had gone too far. But now, for the first time, he realized Carter hadn't just happened to be there. He had been waiting. And that meant Jake had been in far more danger than he ever realized. Jake stood there for a moment, letting Lisa's words sink in. Carter had known all along. This wasn't just a warning, it was a message. A reminder that in their world, respect wasn't just expected, it was enforced. Lisa gave him one last look before turning back to her husband, who stood watching from a distance, his stance relaxed, but his presence still commanding. Without another word, she walked away, leaving Jake alone with his thoughts. Taking a deep breath, Jake straightened his uniform and headed toward his patrol car. He had learned an important lesson today, one that would stick with him for a long time. Some lines weren't meant to be crossed, and some people weren't worth testing. As he drove off, he glanced in his rearview mirror one last time. Carter was still standing there watching. Jake didn't know if they'd ever cross paths again, but one thing was certain, he wouldn't forget this day.